Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's podcast, Taking Care of Business today with Martin Fox, who is managing director of Robert Walters Canada. Thanks for joining us today, Martin.
Thanks for having me, Mario. Pleasure to be here.
Well, you folks put out an interesting report recently on a survey on the workplace. I thought it was quite interesting, some of the stuff we've seen there. I want you to talk a little bit, first of all, Martin. One little data point: 67% of professionals admit to quote unquote rage applying to new roles. Frustrations, obviously, with their current employers. Can you talk a little bit about that? And what do you mean by rage applying?
Sure. Well, put simply, it refers to an employee mass applying to jobs after a buildup of frustrations with their current employer. So perhaps they've had a particularly bad day, or a week or quarter, and there's a number of issues that have built up inside them to lead them to do a mass apply to a number of different positions at once.
So what does that tell you, when you have a figure that high of what's happening in the workplace in Canada?
Yeah, I think a few things are going on. One, both employees and employers are still adjusting to work life post-COVID. So there's been a lot of people who perhaps were hired during the pandemic, who were working 100% remote, never really spent time face to face with their colleagues, and now are encouraged to come back to the office, which a lot of places are doing, 2, 3, 4 days a week, some 5. And from that have realized actually we don't all get along as we thought, and developing those relationships in person are very different than on a screen. So that can lead to people realizing that I don't know if this is going to be for me. There's also probably the biggest factor that came back from the survey was just a general feeling of a toxic workplace environment, which I think is when employees feel that they do not have pride in what they're doing, or who they're working for, or what they're doing is not meeting their ideals in terms of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And that is often due to the overall culture of the company. So that can lead to people doing this, not, interestingly enough, the more traditional reasons, which would be, say, pay or progression, promotion.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Have you seen over the years I guess, a movement away from the focus on pay into all these other areas where this is what an employee wants, right, from a company, including benefits, right? And the benefits could be anything like your typical insurance stuff and health stuff, but also just the amenities in place and all that stuff. Has there been a shift that become more important for employees than money?
Yeah, there has been. I'd say this has been a trend probably the last 3 to 5 years, Mario. So, and there's a couple of factors there. I mean, one, the conversations that happen around pay and progression have their own formal structure. So, annual, biannual reviews, quarterly appraisals, etc. Those are in place for people to talk about these things, and are quite commonplace, I think, in most workplaces. Also, the amount of information and data that's available to people now, everyone has a pretty good idea of what they should be paid, what title they should have with their experience, right? We're inundated with data on that. So those conversations are easier or more commonplace. But the more difficult conversations around, say, toxic culture, difficult colleagues, they're much harder to address. So a lot of, say, employees, especially from the, say, younger generation, choose to maybe not address those in person with their managers, and instead do things like go online and apply to a bunch of jobs, because it makes them feel that they have a bit of control, whereas they don't have a lot of control around the culture or how management is treating them in the workplace. And I think just in the backdrop, a general trend towards mental health, well-being, work-life balance. These are all things that have risen to the top of the hierarchy list for employees. rather than pay and benefits. It's still important, but largely most firms have moved with the times on those.
So, Martin, what are some of the top tips to improve a toxic work environment?
Yeah, I mean, there's no silver bullet, unfortunately, Mario. But there's a few things that we encourage. I mean, first off, this has to be a management issue. Companies need to ensure that this is high on management's agenda. So, ensuring that their management teams understand that morale and a positive working environment is a core responsibility of theirs,
Mm.
right? It's not just a mission statement or what it says on your website or what you say in an induction. The people need to be living and breathing it that are actually line managing, and they need to be held accountable on how they're asking and addressing these issues with their teams, and giving feedback on that, and making sure there's things being put into place to address it. Secondly, very easy things that companies can do would be, for example, launching an anonymous survey that goes to all of their staff. There's no names attached. The questions are open-ended, and it prompts people to go into detail around culture and how they're feeling. And they feel that it comes from a safe space, it's confidential, and they can speak their mind. That then goes up to the top management, is reading it and assessing it. And then, of course, they have to act on it and put in procedures to address it. But that is really useful and something that I think we do quite well as a firm, and that's really helped our culture. And then thirdly, it's investing time and money, Mario. It doesn't come for free. So the fact is here, workplaces are made up of people who are hired because of their skill set and background and qualifications, let's say, to do a particular role, not to be the best of friends. So all of a sudden, especially now when people are being thrown back into work in person, it's not going to be easy. So companies do need to invest the time and money to ensure that they are creating a friendly, social, and inclusive environment. And these things don't just happen by chance.
Yeah, and it's I found it interesting about the acting part, right? Because there's an old phrase about lots of talk, no action, and I found over the years that many companies go through the motions, right? And they do all the training, and they train their staff, they train their management, etc. But then when when it's time they hit the pavement running with the stuff, it doesn't show up, right? And I've always wondered about that, but any thoughts there?
Yeah, talk is cheap, right? As they say, it's easy, and there's excellent ways to market yourself as an inclusive employer and a good culture and all of that. But really, at the end of the day, it comes down to how people are feeling and what you're actually doing. So, and again, that's why I think management has to be in control of these issues, because each manager will have their own team. They need to really own that and create that culture, and show other managers that they're doing it as well. And there's a knock-on effect.
Yeah, exactly. So, when we talk about the quote unquote rage applying thing, from an employee's perspective, if you're applying for a job because you want to leave somewhere, I guess that's not like an attitude that you should be presenting to prospective and potential new employers, right? Because isn't that a question people are going to ask? Well, why are you applying here? Like, and it shouldn't be the negative part, should it?
No, you're right. So what you're saying is the straw that broke the camel's back is how they feel, let's say, about their current workplace to allow them to apply. But then what is the receiving end going to look like? Yes. So, I mean, what I think we have to be clear that what we're talking about here is, say, pent up frustration and perhaps rage, allowing someone to make mass application. That's the outbound action. On the other end, though, when those are being, say, received by an employee, yes, their employer, sorry, they're of course going to question the motivation for making that. And that's where people that are doing this have to be careful that they're not wasting people's time, and that if their interests are genuine, they need to be able to explain that. If you're opening up with like, oh, well, I'm, mad at my boss or something very simple like that, you're probably not going to be taken as as seriously. So I think when people are doing this, they really need to have a clear way that they're going to approach it when they do start getting interest from those applications. And in the current market, it's a very, candidate short market. So I'm imagining that they are going to.
Yeah. So Martin, I'm just curious, do you have any tips for employees that how do you find out if a company that you're applying to has a good work environment and it's not toxic? Any suggestions there for an employee when they're on the look for a new job?
Well, yeah, there's a few things. I mean, one, I will say, not to plug our industry, but if you're using a recruitment consultant, lean on that recruitment consultant a lot. If we are recruiting for a client, we should have a very good idea of who that company is, who the main people are, what the culture is, and be able to really open that window for a candidate even before they apply. So if you're using a recruiter, lean on them, use them. And they're really kind of driving the bus, so to speak, when it comes to the application. There shouldn't be any surprises when you go into the interview. You should know exactly what the culture is going to be. If you're not, the best way would be try to speak to someone that works at that company or has worked at that company, and have a conversation with them, in person ideally, or on the phone at least, rather than on messaging, because a lot can get misconstrued in email and messaging, and actually hear it from them. And then, of course, there's so much information available now, Mario, on from the likes of Glassdoor or LinkedIn, Google reviews, whatever it is, where people are not shy to put on exactly what they feel about certain companies.
Yeah, that's true.
So those are a few things that people can do. You're never going to know 100%, of course. There's always going to be a risk. But I think from the interviews that you have, you should be ready to ask questions around culture, specific questions that you want, because culture can mean different things. It could be work-life balance. It could be what snacks do they have in the kitchen. It could be, can I bring my pet to work? It's a very broad term, right? So I think you need to go into interviews loaded with questions that you want to hear the answers to. And if you don't like it, then, don't go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks very much, Martin, for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome, Mario. Thanks for your time.
All right, that was Martin Fox, who is Managing Director of Robert Walters Canada. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, Managing Editor of Taking Care of Business on Canada's podcast. Thanks for joining us today.